Namaste and good evening, everyone. I, Ritika Gupta, Assistant Director at IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, Prabhav Evam Niti Anusandhan Sansthan, New Delhi, extend my heartiest welcome to you all to IMPRI #ThePolicyTalk. Today we are here for a special talk on climate change mitigation and agenda for WASH sector organization. This talk is part of the series #Water and Climate, which is being organized by Center for Environment, Climate Change and Sustainable Development at IMPRI, Tarun Bharat Sangh, India Water Portal, and Parmat Samaj Sevi Sansthan. I would now like to request Dr. Indira Khurana, who is who is Vice Chair at Tarun Bharat Sangh and a senior expert in water sector. Ma'am, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ritika, for welcoming our speakers tonight and all the, this evening, and all the people who are with us on this session on #Water and Climate. Like Ritika mentioned, we are doing a series looking at different aspects of water and climate and inviting different eminent speakers, who can give us their insights, their experience, and their thoughts around water and climate and how best we can ensure water security for all and forever in a situation where we are facing climate change. Like Ritika mentioned, our speakers today are Amulya and Raman. Both are from WaterAid, an organization very close to my heart since I did a lot of my learning and sensitization from WaterAid. And they will be speaking to us on climate change mitigation and adaptation and agenda for WASH sector organizations. I'd like to introduce our speakers. I'll start with Amulya. Amulya is a policy officer leading drinking water sanitation and climate change related initiatives at WaterAid India. She is an engineer turned policy enthusiast with a master's degree in environmental engineering and has worked as a wastewater engineer in the US prior to starting her journey in the development sector in India. She is passionate about the environment, youth engagement, and equity and inclusion. She likes to travel and explore local cuisines during her free time. Welcome, Amulya, and you're a girl after my own heart. I think we need more people like you to work with us on water sanitation and hygiene, with the correct focus, which is on equity and inclusion and engaging the youth. I'd also like to introduce Mr. V.R. Raman, a dear friend of mine. He is a public policy expert with over 25 years of experience in multiple human development sectors. His involvement has been into research, advocacy, administration, implementation, and teaching of various aspects of public policies and programs, in different states of India and globally, and has been associated with government agencies, large-scale programs, civil society organizations, and academic institutions. He is currently working as the head of policy with WaterAid India. He is also the national convener of the Public Health Resource Network. Climate change and environment are areas that he has worked across sectors. So I think we have two really good speakers with us. And before I hand over the mic to them, I'd just like to place before Amulya and Raman and the people listening in some of my thoughts. There was a quote one time which I read and I've actually used in one of my books. And that's a quote by Lao Tzu, Chinese philosopher of the 6th century BC. So he said, the health of our waters is the principal measure of how we live on the land. To put your hands in a river is to feel the cords that bind the earth together. So clearly, if you look at the state of water globally and in India today, we have not lived our lives very well. Whether we talk of the availability of water, the affordability, access, quality, any aspect of water. Even when we realize that value has a value much way beyond what we can actually, quote unquote, do with the water, it's linked to our culture, our peace, security, happiness. Even the World Economic Forum recognizes the importance of water, and its absence leads to distress migration, displacement, health and disease, and large-scale insecurity and conflict. As we all know, the SDG goal number 6, which is around water, sanitation, hygiene, is a goal that underpins achievement of several other development goals. So already we're in a scenario where we've not been managing our water well, and we now have this additional huge challenge of climate change. One of the major impacts of which is going to be on weather and water, be it increased disasters and extreme weather events, change in rainfall pattern, drought, and many other events, which I'm sure Raman and Amulya will tell us. When we talk about climate change, there are two aspects. One is the mitigation. How do we reduce the amount of warming? What are the technologies that we can use? How do we reduce emissions, not only through technology use, but also cutting down our demands? And the other aspect is mitigation. How do we make ourselves resilient to this uncertainty that this climate change is already bringing upon us? So this was the situation before 2020, before this great COVID-19 pandemic hit us. We were already in an unenviable and unviable position where we were totally mismanaging water and bearing the brunt of climate. And now we are bearing the brunt of climate change as well as the brunt of the 2 waves of pandemic, if I speak about India. And it was very, what should I say, challenging, because as we were going through the throes of the waves, last year we had a huge tropical storm in Maharashtra and other parts of the coast. And this year we had two cyclones, one that hit Gujarat and the other that hit Odisha and West Bengal. So we're already struggling with a soaring wave, and then we're having these natural disasters. So clearly, we need to reflect on where we are and what is it that we are doing. The pandemic has forcibly brought out several issues. As we all know, and WaterAid will tell us, that hygiene became really critical. But where is the water? How do you manage an extreme weather event in the midst of a pandemic? How do you manage the requirements of menstrual hygiene, safe drinking water, sanitation? How do you look at marginalized communities, people with disabilities, special requirements of women? So all these are additional challenges that this pandemic and the storms brought out. And scientists have warned us that, we are going to face many more pandemics if we don't learn to live with nature, and if we don't reduce our interventions into forests and continue with our deforestation approaches. For a very long time, the water sector and organizations like WaterAid have done great work in providing access to safe drinking water, sanitation, and hygiene to communities in rural and urban areas, and mostly communities who are marginalized. And in the current scenario, I think now they will need, and I'm sure they are, thinking about how do they make this effort sustainable? What are the different levels now that they will have to intervene so that people continue to get access to safe water, sanitation, and hygiene forever, equally, and in a sustainable manner. So with these few words, I'd now like to invite Amulya and Raman to please go ahead with your presentation. If you could finish it in about 35 minutes, that would be great, because that would give us some time to kind of discuss on the points that you placed before us, and also address any questions that are coming in from our audience. Over to you. Thank you.
So thank you, Indira. Thank you, Arjun and the INFRI team here. For me, it is the second time that I'm coming here for this talk, but Amulya, probably this is her first experience of being part of this. So we have structured this presentation in 3 parts, the discussion in 3 parts. One will contextualize the issue and establish the WASH climate change linkages and the need kind of a thing. And the second part will look at the kind of interventions the WaterAid has done in some of these areas to understand it and to address it in as a beginning. And then we'll go into a recent kind of thing that we developed about an agenda of action that could be applicable for most of the water sector organizations. So we had, in WaterAid, the climate change and the WASH integration was happening as part of a process. When we were starting to work on, from a service delivery approach to a rights-based approach almost a decade ago, and then, moving into the directions of sustainable development goals. So it was important that unless, all the various, initiatives that we are putting forward are connected with, some of the overarching issues. If they are not connected with some of the overarching issues, probably what we may achieve will not sustain, and that will not be beneficial for the purpose for which it has been, done. So this realization is something that over the last 2 years we are looking at, integrating, all various activities of WaterAid into the lens of climate change. And some 5-6 years before we started to conceptualize this, to understand this, and to kind of do this. So last year in WaterAid India, we had two major initiatives that was happening. One was to put together a kind of draft approach paper, which further Amulya and myself we are working on it. One with Dr. Shivasena Reddy supported us in putting together some of the kind of details on this, and further we are now working on it in the context of the strategy of WaterAid and overall a water sector organization's perspective. Similarly, we are also trying to understand some of the what related climate change challenges through a partnership research. Amulya will give some details of that later. And we are also part of a water and climate change campaign globally. We have rolled out that involves advocacy, that involves a lot of initiatives. And in India, as part of a transboundary water security program, some 4 years before, we started the participatory vulnerability assessment and related initiatives for water conservation as well. Those are also something, the details that Amulya will become. So here, what I'm going to do is to put up a brief context of climate linkages of WASH. So first, as we, it is not just mitigation, as Indra has already told. It is also about building the kind of preventive mechanism and preparedness mechanism and the resilience in the community, in addition to mitigating the risks of climate change in the water sector. So one of the problem of the narrative of the climate change is that is where I want to begin with. The climate change narrative starts from outside. This is a problem. The problem is that we see it from the temperature, and the temperature is something external to the place that we are living. I mean, although it is part of the solar system or universe or whatever, to the earth that we are living as humankind, the temperature is something that we see as flowing from outside. But we need to see climate change actually from an internal perspective, wherein there are several factors that adds to the change of temperature from outside, which is related to our own kind of movements or advancement as humankind, which we call under the development frame. So that is where the sustainable tag has been added to the development. How to sustain the development in a way that next generation can also benefit it, in a way that we ourselves can take the benefit of it in the long run. So this understanding is missing. So that is where water becomes the core of climate change for me. So if we see climate change from the lens of water, that would make it more live than a kind of hypothetical understanding of climate change from the temperature perspective. So I would like to present center of climate change as water, extending that to wash, that would give more kind of space and interventional opportunities for water sector organizations. So I'm a bit contextually and intentionally giving this narrative. So the need of the paradigm shift from temperature to water. The second part is that how we are consuming water. So there is a fourfold increase that we are seeing over the last 70 years. And further 20-30% we are seeing as part of the urbanization. Then in India, we have a lot of worries of the increasing disasters. Indra has already told about them. High frequency of the flash floods, rainfall events, droughts, heat waves, tropical cyclones, a lot of eventualities are happening here. And access to water services has been eventually impacted because of this. And if you look at another outcome of the health-related morbidity and mortality, I'm putting up the indicator of mortality here. Close to 11,500 deaths happened in the 5-year time just because of water-related health challenges. We call it waterborne diseases, but there can be something more to that. So I'm not including everything as waterborne diseases. I'm putting a term as water-related challenges here, health challenges here. And then drinking water availability and environmental sanitation, including the efforts that we put up for solid and liquid waste management, access to hygiene, all these gets affected because of this. And we need to also see climate change from a lens that it is a key and important component of climate change adaptation and resilience, even during the normal circumstances wherein the challenges are not paused and even post-disaster situations. So this is how the climate change and WASH is related. So the impacts on what we can see that rapid urbanization, that leads to acute water scarcity and high demand for the basic water services. So there is a 55.2% of urban population rise that has been projected by 2050 with comparison to 2007. So this is something very, what you call considerable kind of instrumental kind of height. And there is a decreasing trend in the monsoon rainfall. The South India is now on monsoons. It is already 2 days delayed, as per the reports that we are seeing. So there is a clear decline in the overall monsoon. And groundwater depletion is also one issue. We are extracting groundwater from aquifers beyond whatever could be recharged or refilled. That beyond that we are going. So you can see that 2 reports recently. One is the Central Groundwater Board, and the other one is the Niti Aayog. Both of them are suggesting water stress is going up. The number of administrative regions that is affected by water stress is quite high compared to 10 years before or 20 years before. And then the land use pattern and the land cover pattern, that is also quite significantly changing. That is also becoming a reason for non-recharge of groundwater and aquifers. And urban infrastructure in this is adding more vulnerabilities because most of the land is getting covered. So that is another issue there. And then our own programs like Swachh Bharat Mission or the waste management initiatives, the errors and some technological and technical errors that is happening as part of this mass and large scale programs also are contributing to this dilemma. So water and environmental dilemma is getting added up. So these are something that we should see as impact on WASH. And let us see climate change induced disasters. What is the kind of impact? So we have mass migration that is happening of population because of floods or because of droughts, and similarly decreased access to water services. Lives are kind of we are losing, and property we are losing, and livelihoods are very heavily kind of affected. And psychologically, there is a lot of effects on population, and we have purchasing power and production that has been increased, and economic growth and development is continuously getting hindered. And there are clear political and policy implications for these as well. So if we see that poverty and inequality are the key underlying socio-economic drivers that is going to increase India's climate vulnerability. So this is something that we need to understand from the climate perspective. So floods and droughts, unless we are able to understand the causes of them or prevent to the extent it is possible, things are going to be worse for us. Then examples of some actions by the government. I'm not putting up all the detailed list here. It is just examples. All the names are listed, so I'm not going to read them. So climate change adaptation strategies by Government of India in the context of what there is a lot of programs. You can see that it starts from Jal Jeevan Mission and from Health Department, various other departments. There are a lot of initiatives that they have tried to start. There is a mission on climate action, but however, we don't know exactly what is the spend or what has been done under that. It is there as a mission in the Niti Aayog and various websites. We know that there is a mission, there is a initiative that has been started, but how it is running, what is the mission management mode, we exactly don't know about it. And then in 21-22, the budgets we are looking at 6% hike we are seeing from the expenditure of 19-20. So that is not sufficient for looking at and actually achieving climate mitigation or climate adaptation. So it is just 0.1% of the estimated expenditure of the union government. That is one issue that we need to understand. And then various flagship programs, there are they are integrated through whether it is MG Narega, NRLM, Urban Livelihood Mission, all that. But how much it is getting integrated is a question that we need to understand. And finally, the civil society organizations, yes, on papers, we can see that there is increasing role of civil society organization, but actually how much it is something that we need to reflect upon. So there is a little more than, what has been listed here, but we need to ask ourselves that whether this is enough or not, or we need to do more. This is how the overall situation is. Now look at climate financing. So if you see the overall impact of climate change in the water sector, you can see that from the below, high groundwater kind of extraction without proper regulation or recharging, that depletes the water level. Then it goes into next, when the water level gets depleted, the water quality, geogenic contamination comes in. And then when it comes to the poor sanitation infrastructure and also waste management processes are adding to this. And then poor hygiene leading to morbidities, and also poor hospital hygiene leading to overuse of antibiotics and antimicrobial contamination of water. And then all these require more fresh water for us, and again we are depleting. So this is the wash related cycle of water use. So we need to really understand climate change from this lens. How can we prevent the climate change because of the water depletion is a question that we need to more and more ask. So we need to see groundwater levels and groundwater contamination as the prominent indicator of climate change from the water sector. And we look at climate financing, it is less than 1% for WASH. And while we are seeing agriculture, industry, infrastructure development, etc., as the major contributors, we need to really see WASH also as an important sector here. And we need to argue and advocate for better financing, climate financing for water sector. I'll now hand over to Amulya for putting up some of the experiences and some of the initiatives that WaterAid has done in the climate change and WASH, that bridging kind of initiative that we have done over last few years. Over to Amulya. Thank you, Amulya.
Thank you so much, Raman. And good evening, everyone. Thank you so much to IMPRI and to Dr. Indira and also Raman for giving me this opportunity. And I'm glad that Raman has set this context straight for this discussion. So I'm not going to dwell deep into that, but going to share a little bit about the works that WaterAid India has been doing in the past few years and how we are planning to approach and integrate climate change within all WASH actions that we are planning to take. So if we look at some of the studies that we have undertaken through the policy department as well as the programs department within WaterAid, in 2017, we have conducted a study which talks about the sustainability of toilets that were constructed as part of the Swachh Bharat mission or the toilets in general in different parts of the country. And one of the biggest findings from this particular study was that during the period 2017, we have found that 31% of the toilets that we have looked into are found to be unsafe. When we say unsafe, what is it that we mean? We mean that these toilets are not suitable for the terrains that they are in, or these toilet technologies that are used are not sustainable, or there are certain types of toilets such as the single pit toilets, which require the direct human interface with fecal matter. So that means engaging manual scavenging persons and everything. So why is it important for us to also look at this is because until a few years ago, perhaps it wouldn't have been important for us to think about, oh, what will happen if my toilet is, say, not at a safe distance from my water source. But that is not the discussion anymore because of the erratic droughts and the flood situation that Raman has mentioned. And also Dr. Indira had clearly mentioned, and something that all of us have come across in the recent past, things are very unpredictable. In areas there are severe droughts, you are suddenly seeing a severe flooding situation, or there are like erratic patterns. As a result, there is quite a lot of groundwater contamination and a lot of flooding in sanitation systems, especially when we are talking about small towns and rural areas where there is no proper fecal sludge management. People are having to empty these septic tanks and toilet pits. So with changing climate and changing climatic patterns, these things are only bound to worsen. We have also noticed that 36% of the toilets are safe, but they are not sustainable. And as Dr. Indira had mentioned in the context, sustainability and resilience are extremely important when we are trying to integrate WASH with the climate change lens. So when we are talking about any toilet structure, it is not just important that there is a toilet structure, but it is also important for us to consider what is the type of structure, what is the terrain that the structure is in, what are the socio-economic norms that the area is in, and everything. So if we do not take into consideration different aspects while constructing toilets or any sort of sanitation or water infrastructure, the sustainability and resilience of these things in the future to come, where the predictions are that 1.5 degrees increase in temperature or depletion of groundwater to a level where most cities and areas will be water stressed, will burden much more. And whilst in 2017, we have seen that 33% of the toilets that we have surveyed are sustainable and safe, we do not know what the situation is right now. While in 2017, there were new toilets and constructed at that point in time and had some sort of septic tanks or storage pits. What is the situation right now? Are they being emptied? Are they not being emptied? Is the practice of manual scavenging still going on? How is this going to look like in the future to come when the implications of climate change are only going to worsen? Post this particular study, in 2019, we have then conducted another study wherein we also wanted to check different topographies, different geographies, and then try to understand what are the type of toilet substructures that are there and how efficient are they and what is required in terrain specificity. So when we looked at that particular study, if you can look at this particular graph and say that in areas where there is black soil or in desert sort of terrains, the usage of substructures is good enough that there wouldn't be any issue with flooding and everything. But if we look at flood-prone areas with high water table, 43.7% of the structures were found to be not suitable for the terrain. So that means while there are these structures, what is going to happen when there is an occasion of a severe flood or a drought? What is going to happen when the impacts of climate change are going to worsen? This is something that we have started looking through as part of our studies. Is it's not just water or sanitation or hygiene, but whatever it is that we are looking at, we need to also look at it through the lens of climate change. What is it going to look like 5 to 10 years from now when the impacts of climate change are only going to worsen? So recently, after our initial study in 2017 and then another study in 2019, in 2020, we have conducted another study in the small and medium towns across India, wherein we have surveyed 1,200 households, of which 84.6%, a very high number of households, have been told to have their toilet structure at a very unsafe distance from their groundwater, at an unsafe horizontal distance. That means less than 10-meter distance between where the toilet and its substructure is to where the groundwater source, their major source of drinking water is. Of these households, only 40% of the households have reported that they have septic tanks. And the remaining do not even understand what is underneath their toilet structure or what is going to happen or how groundwater gets contaminated as a result of fecal matter. So this was something that we have found, and this is something that we are looking at and would urge all organizations on this front also to look at is how, like when we are talking about sanitation structures, why is it important for us to take into consideration the sustainability of a toilet structure, or why is it important for us to construct resilient sanitation infrastructure is something that we are quite keenly looking at and something that we are planning to look at in the future to come as well. Also, as Raman had mentioned, one of the big initiatives that we have taken to integrate water at its focus, but also taking into consideration sanitation and hygiene and integrating it with climate change is something called the Jal Chowpal model. Jal Chowpal is basically a democratic approach and a water platform that integrates the communities, making sure that people and the communities get a voice and express what their requirements are, what their needs are, and understand about what is the situation within their village and how they can improve their groundwater situation, as well as ensuring that whatever measures they are taking are climate resilient. Given that majority of the areas that we work in are either drought prone or flood prone, it is important that we bring that awareness within the communities as to why it is important for us to take care of our water infrastructure, and also giving them a platform to express their grievances, express their troubles, express what is it that they want to do, rather than a top-down model. Jal Chowpal looks at a bottom-up approach, wherein we are trying to converge different local governments with the communities and providing a safe space for these communities, whilst also providing them any sort of technical assistance, such as giving them technical advice on how to integrate watershed management, or how do we ensure water budgeting, or trying to talk to the communities and train them with water quality testing and different approaches, and also supporting local governments with different policy and decision-making processes. And one of the big pilot studies that we have done as part of this is in Banda district of Uttar Pradesh, wherein we have introduced this Jal Chowpal model in 435 different Gram Panchayats, held meetings with more than 20,000 community members, and brought awareness among them about the need for safe and secure water usage and water storage and conservation, as well as the impact of climate change that they have and how they could potentially manage and mitigate this. And recently, in end of 2020-21, we have started a collaboration with the University of California, Santa Barbara, wherein currently we are working with 7 different student researchers who are working in different parts of remotely because of the pandemic. If it weren't for the pandemic, the students would have been in India and have gone to different locations that we have selected, taking into consideration the risk factor. When we talk about climate change and when we thought about what could be the areas that can be impacted severely in the coming 5 to 10 years because of climate change, the first thing that comes into mind is coastal and disaster prone areas. And then there are also these tribal areas and underserved communities. There are drought prone areas and remote rural areas. There are hilly and mountain terrains which use traditional water sources such as springs. And we also have emerging urban population, especially in terms of census towns, if we look at, and the increasing rate of urban poor within these settings. And also there are areas which are acutely affected by water quality, may that be fluoride, arsenic, microbes, salinity, and everything. So we have considered 7 different locations across India, taking into consideration each of these factors, and have assigned each student researcher to different parts across the country. We are working in Uttar Pradesh, we are working in Orissa, we are working in Madhya Pradesh, in Karnataka, and a couple of locations in Madhya Pradesh, Shivpuri and Dhar. So we are trying to look at what is it that is happening in these areas. Historically, has there been any change in the past, say, 50, 100 years? What has the rainfall pattern been like? What have the changes been like? what is the existing climate variability in these regions, and what are they anticipating in the near future to come. What are the communities themselves trying to do, rather than us trying to look at literature and understand what is happening. We're trying to interact with community using participatory appraisal tools and try to get their take on what is climate change and how they are looking at climate change and what they are doing to address climate change. So we have a different case studies and stories that are developing at this point in time, with a lot of lessons from the community-based adaptation and the practices that they follow. And also we are trying to look at what are the various drivers of vulnerability that are keeping the most marginalized and the poor people at risk. And what are the different policy and program level changes that we can take as based on the learnings from this study moving forward. And also, how do we form these synergies between climate vulnerabilities, local development needs, and cultural aspirations, whilst also focusing on the livelihoods of communities, is something we are trying to look at. And so far, because of the pandemic, the flow of the study has slowed down in the past 2 months. But in the next month or a month and a half, we are going to come up with a series of case studies wherein the students are going to present their findings, and we are hopeful that these set of case studies will be a first step for WaterAid and also for many WASH sector organizations for us to effectively include water and climate change together, and also think about ways forward with integrating climate change, sustainability, and resilience with WASH. So with that, I will give it again to Raman to discuss about the agenda. Thank you.
Okay. So thanks. So one thing is, based on all these experiences, we were trying to quickly put together a framework for action or an agenda for action for WaSH sector organizations, both for, adaptation of, climate change initiatives, resilience, preparedness, etc., and also, kind of mitigation measures when something happens. What all can be the immediate thing that the WaSH sector organizations can focus on these things is the question that we are trying to look at. So the community level, what all are the key requirements when it comes to climate change adaptation strategies? So with integrated water resource management approach and also participatory tools, what all are the key things? One, we need coordination among the communities, community institutions, and the PRIs, and also the public and private actors, both government and private. So then, we need to have the dialogues and discussions, that process need to take place. We need to establish better linkages among water resources managers and, the users. The efficient use and judicious, equitable use, also regulated use in that sense. We need to establish that. Then we need to have a proper management and, harvesting of rainwater. We need to look at surface water, groundwater, and also household and community level water resources. Then safety of sanitation structures and processes is quite important as part of we need to establish this as part of the climate change preparedness and mitigation measures. And then there is one repetition here, so I'm not going into, sorry, so that was not removed. So then recycle and reusing of the water to enhance productivity of water. And then we need to also ensure that conservation and protection of the water bodies, specifically in the urban areas, also in rural areas, and the liquid waste management related to that. The grey water waste is not going to the water bodies and contaminating it. And then finally, developing and strengthening various institutional arrangements and processes for supporting these activities at the village level. So this is the broad requirement. The details are there. I'm not going into that. We are developing a document wherein all the details of this are further worked out. Yeah. So then, what sector organizations? What are their roles in establishing or achieving this? One is, first of all, like Amulya has said about what we are doing with various locations in India, 7 locations in India. We need to really develop across India on various geographical and climatical and cultural contexts, all the various contexts. We need to understand a very clear understanding of water-related climate vulnerability, water-related, sanitation-related, and wherever hygiene is applicable, hygiene-related. And then what is the kind of direct or indirect impacts of that? about access and livelihoods, and also resources and supplies. All this we need to understand from the climate change lens. And then based on this understanding, we need to plan a kind of potential preventive actions, which should be integrated with the ongoing WASH action. It's not a standalone action that I'm suggesting. So all, this should be equitable and sustainable manner with reference to various WASH programs. So all the various programs which are going on at the community level, all the new programs that the civil society is initiating, how to make it based on this understanding, building in and integrating the climate, understanding in that. And then mainstreaming the climate change lens into all areas of WASH action by way of capacity building, multi-sectoral integration approach, keeping the PRIs at the center, and conducting dialogues between various actors and various types of actors and various levels of actors. I mean, this is quite important. There are types of actors and there are levels of actors. We need to involve all of them. And then ensuring and augmenting generation of local data, not from a top-down approach of monitoring, but from a local use perspective of data. This is quite missing. When we were trying to prepare the paper, one of the major realization is that unless and until civil society initiates, we will not have proper data for any of these things. So civil society has a major role, because I am not thinking that in the current way, unless the civil society and people are initiating data, the accountability of the administrative structures are there. We should stand for it. But the history is suggesting that we will have to also parallelly develop data. And then finally, development and use of technology to leverage these processes. And coordination support to the state actors at various levels. And finally, research and advocacy, both for program design changes, policy changes, guideline changes, etc., and also for financing. So this is something that we need to ensure at the WASH sector civil society organizations agenda. So based on this, we are trying to develop a framework, and on each of that component of that framework, sub-components of action, how to do that kind of a framework we are developing. And for that, if we have to ensure that there are some conditions that we need to ensure, that is what is the last slide about. So one is existing and new policies and schemes on WASH should emphasize immediate as well as long-term climate change connections on that. And significant investment in learning and innovation is needed for the both education on climate integrated WASH and also on behavior change related to climate integration and WASH. And then we need to ensure that climate change induced multi-hazard perspective we need to have in WASH program components, whether it is disaster management, whether it is various other initiatives, we need to bring in that. And promoting a bottom-up approach pertaining to WASH and climate change. And finally, data, real-time IT and GIS-based kind of data systems we will have to initiate. And then every point in WASH policy decision-making, we need to include climate change perspective there. And identifying, protecting, and supporting vulnerable geographies and populations are very important. So we need to have measures for that. And financing is one of the other important conditions. And finally, we will have to, for the civil society, the last point is about civil society. For the civil society also, there needs to be sufficient funding for climate-centered WASH action. So this is where this kind of a framework can be operationalized. So with this, I think we have covered the outer layer of or the macro details of what should be done. The micros are missing. The micros needs to be added, but that we can probably add while through some workshops or some action-oriented workshops in the future. I hope this discussion would have given some understanding of how the climate change could be ground-based rather than temperature-based, and how can we reorient the WASH action from the climate change premises, and how to change the narrative and how to shift the paradigm. We probably have some ideas to begin with, we hope, and thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Raman, Amulya, and again, Raman, for sharing your work, your thoughts. You're saying it's a macro perspective of the framework, but I think a lot of details you have included in this, as well as the research that you're doing along with the University of California at Santa Barbara. We look forward to when these documents are are going to be finalized, and realizing that this pandemic has just thrown a spanner of all forms and all kinds into this work. And I'm sure this work of yours will go a long way in informing policy and also informing practice. I liked what you said, like, water, like, we're looking at it from outside and, the rise in temperature, but we should be looking at it from water, because that's what we say, water is climate and climate is water. That's a slogan that we have been using for a while. And it was also, I think, one of the World Water Day themes, because water also influences the climate and its absence also influences the climate, and vice versa. And there are now lots of examples, and also proved scientifically that, if you do proper plantation in deserts, and this is the work that Tarun Bharat Sangh has done for more than 25, 30 years. But there was a paper last year in Proceedings of National Academy of Sciences, which said that if you do afforestation, then you can attract clouds, and where the rain will fall. So there is a kind of circular kind of relationship which we need to stress upon and deepen. I liked your Raman and Amulya. And before I say that, Amulya, you mentioned about the Jal Chaupals in Banda district. I'd like to tell you that in one of our webinars, we had Dr. Hiralal, who was then the collector of Banda. He spoke of the great work that he's done, and everywhere there was this in partnership with WaterAid. So yeah, so good job. That work was endorsed by him in a public forum as well. I like that Wala put a lot of emphasis on that, whatever we do, whatever information we get, however we move forward, that has to come from the ground, that has to come from the communities. And you all have also focused on the different geographies. I think your research is also looking at 6 or 7 different geographies, coastal areas and tribal areas and things like that. So that's really important. Because I know that in the 70s, the National Commission on Agriculture classified India into 90 different geocultural agricultural zones. So that's the kind of diversity that exists in this country. And unless we have a technology or an approach that takes this into account, things will not be sustainable, and we will end up with the results that she showed about 33% of the toilets not being sustainable, and the issues of water quality. So I think the diversity that we have is something that we must take into account. Otherwise, how would somebody in Rajasthan make do with 100 mm of water, and how would Mohsen Ram say water everywhere, not a drop to drink? So clearly the practices and the human behavior in these different geographies has to be taken into account. Coming to what you said about it's important to have a decentralized approach. And I think you know where I'm coming. Jal Jeevan Mission guidelines has something which is kind of looks like infrastructure heavy, which looks at top down. The role of the community right now doesn't appear to be really clear. They don't have much say in the decision making. That's the impression we get. Plus, we all know that we may provide the taps and the toilets and the hand pumps or whatever, but we know if there's no water, if the tap runs dry, if the hand pump runs dry, for that we need water resource strengthening and augmentation. And unfortunately, these guidelines say that you can access funding for this from the different schemes that are available. So it's the most important part, I think, in the whole scheme of things, is the most difficult part to get the funding. And you're again and again stressing on the need for increasing climate financing. So I'd like to get some of your views on this. And then I have a set of other questions which I would like to pose before you. And if there are any questions from the audience, then or comments, we can take that as well. Over to you.
Mulya, you can go first with some of your thoughts.
Sure, Raman. Thank you, Dr. Indira, for bringing in some of the important points, and also for bringing in Jal Jeevan Mission, while looking at this lens. It is important for all of us to look at Jal Jeevan Mission and Swachh Bharat Mission being such flagship missions, which are being implemented across the country and trying to, make sure that India is open defecation free, or trying to make sure that Har Ghar Nal or Har Ghar Jal. So to make sure that every household, it was started with rural, but now during the 2021 budget discussions, the Union Finance Minister has also released funding for the JJM Urban as well. So releasing such major flagship schemes, trying to, provide everybody with water, as you have very clearly mentioned, yes, there will be tap, but what if there is no water? So that idea of as we started with, the need for sustainability and resilience, whenever we are thinking of such flagship missions, is missing. And as you have rightly mentioned, given that there are so many geocultural differences in different parts of the country, changing from one district to another, no guidelines can be generalized and just, giving these guidelines to the local governments and telling them ki, chaliye ji aap implement kar lijiye, does not work. It is important for the union as well as the states and local governments to understand the role that communities play in it. How important it is, especially the way our Jal Chowpal model has worked, and how it had integrated communities together, and how even after years of implementation that the community is taking ownership of these things. The onus of their management and operations and maintenance on themselves is something that is very, very, very critical whenever we are talking about water in a climate change perspective, or even whenever we talk about in a long-term perspective, 10 years down the line. We have the mission being implemented today. Yes, there are going to be taps and toilets, but what is going to happen 10 years down the line is something that we are also trying to advocate towards, and some of our studies with regards to large villages with large dense populations, villages with multi-villages having a large scheme together and everything. And what is happening in areas with water quality issues and everything, we are trying to bring these issues and trying to emphasize on the need for community-based approach and a bottom-up approach, and trying to advocate and inform the JJM about this. Some of the studies that we are carrying out are showing some of the results that you have rightfully mentioned. And we are more than happy to share those reports with you and get your opinions on them. But as you have clearly mentioned, it is people like us, supporting various initiatives at state and national levels, take the initiative to inform and provide with the case studies like we have done. May those be through the case studies that are coming from the field, through the UCSB study, or through the Jal Chowpal models, and inform the Jal Jeevan Mission or different governments, and provide them with the results that we have shown, and urge them to take these initiatives forward. But it is a long way, but rightfully we are starting that step, and hopefully there will be some progress on that.
Great, good to know.
To add to a couple of points there, Indira. One is that the climate for policies and programs are also quite critical. I'm talking about the so one is that while putting together these slides, I had clearly differentiated water supply infrastructure and water supply services. These are not clubbed as one. So this is quite important because there is a experience of the Mission Bhagiratha in Telangana, the large scale water supply program that the Telangana government has initiated. So one of the things that we are understanding is that it's not about infrastructure, because there is a policy translation curve also. When the policies are written in the Jal Jeevan Mission guidelines, community participation is paramount. It is very clearly, and implementation support agencies, various things. It is crystal clear about how the program should go. But we know how it is getting translated at the state level, from state to district level, and district to panchayat level. End of the day, it becomes a target-driven approach, wherein you have this many days and this many panchayats, this many infrastructure, this many contractors, this much money to spend. So the entire dialogue, entire debate becomes of spending the targets and achieving the numbers, rather than addressing this, which area people will not look at, geography and the vulnerability of those things people will not look at. So we have seen this in Swachh Bharat mission. So we have been trying to, because at the, we are almost across 2 years, and the next 2 years and the last year is going to see the rush of things. So how can we continuously engage with the government, inform the government, not only at the national level, because informing at the national level is not necessarily going to change the, the dilemmas. The dilemmas are to be addressed at the local level. So how to engage at the local level is the critical question that civil societies has to address at this point, given there is a voice for them. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, because if there is a program and it has to be implemented in the panchayats, so it's best to see how civil society and other organizations can engage at that level to see how best they can kind of take advantage of the funding or of the program. But yeah, I agree with that. Okay, so I have another 2 questions for you. One is about we have a set of, we've done almost 60 webinars. There is a Jal Biradari in Maharashtra. Every Sunday, they do a Aao Nadi Ko Jaane, right? So one time they had the director of NIRI, I'm forgetting his name. He was there, and that was looking at the pollution about rivers. So he was expressing his concern and the data that they had got, that the centralized approach of sewage transportation and treatment and then disposal in the rivers after treatment, he said that was something that was not viable because of the history, the experience that we've had all these years, and also that it required a huge amount of money for just operating and maintaining the STPs. And that is something that we all know, but hearing it from him was something which was like kind of critical. So that municipalities and others don't have that kind of money to continuously operate that. So I wanted to check with you, what is your opinion or what is your experience on looking at decentralized fecal sludge management? Also, given that this system is very energy intensive also, no? You're going to have, so it affects the water, rivers become sewers, but it's very energy intensive. So if you're looking at climate change mitigation, then, one way to reduce that would be to looking also at small scale decentralized structures. So just your experience in that.
So couple of quick things I'll tell, and a couple of technical areas which, Amulya can pick up, I guess.
Our environment engineer.
Yeah. So one thing is, when we talk and when we call the decentralized fecal sludge management approaches, because of the donor environments and because of the ongoing discourses, it has been defined as single approach or 2, which is a problem in our country setting. So we need to look at one, the sewer line centric and centralized kind of approaches. It suits for crowded populations wherein you have space and all that. But you need to, as you rightly said, you need to have that investment and infrastructural kind of arrangements, and also the safety kind of measure that is necessary for the workers and related the staff structure and all that. The decentralized system, the problem is that in a liberal economy like ours, wherein people are deliberately looking for some kind of engagement and income. So the cheap labor, and also because of the caste system and various exploitation related to that, including economic exploitations. There is a cheap labor that is available, which entirely kills the definition of things of fecal sludge management. That central principle of fecal sludge management, that it should not be human, interfaced. So that principle. So we need to keep that principle at the center. That human interface from the fecal sludge management should totally, done away with. So with that, we can look at. Otherwise, we are going to open up something very problematic in the rural settings as well. So rivers, we may remove the pollution of rivers, but the human pollution will continue. So, I mean, this is something that we need to look at. And secondly, the systems and processes, mechanization. So the investment needs to be seen from not just as a contracting out to someone else as a service provider, but also to look at the capital and also the operations maintenance of that. So the financial environment towards ensuring that. So you have money. So that is the financial question that you were asking about. If you look at the 14th Finance Commission, you remember, we had a discussion a couple of years before about Orissa and Bihar. Indira, you were also there, about how the panchayats are spending the money allocated under the 14th Finance Commission. So that is a pathetic situation wherein 35% of the money is the only total spending that people are able to achieve. So how to improve their strengths and systems for understanding the financial spending, financial capacities, accounting capacities, and all that. And over and above that, it is also important that this incentive-based system that the 15th Finance Commission is introducing, that incentive-based system should also define some of the responsibilities of those evaluators. I mean, at the state level and at the district level, what is the kind of minimum support you will provide to those panchayats to achieve those milestones towards achieving this incentive? These kinds of questions are important, and we need to have multiple choices according to the specific geography. Some could be very simple processing technologies wherein our contamination related worries are lesser, and wherever vulnerabilities are high, we need to go for sophisticated ones, so that options of choices, that is quite important for decentralized fecal sludge management. And I'm hopeful that our continuous discussion with the Government of India Swachh Bharat Mission on this, they are hearing it, but how to operationalize this with entire control of financing at the panchayat is a challenge. So again, the answer comes that you need to work with the lower level of, not lower actually, the actual level of operationalization. Amulya, you can add some of the other points.
Yeah, but it's also a challenge for urban areas, Raman. It's not only rural, urban. Municipalities don't have money, and it doesn't make sense. They're just dumping in the rivers.
The Finance Commission allocation provide, and also 50% of that money can go for sanitation. So the allocations, technically is there, but practically there can be difficulties about guidelines, suggesting you spend on this. So finally, for the actual purpose, money will not be there. So it is a tied, untied fund in that sense. Yeah. Over to you, Amulya.
All right. Thank you so much. So firstly, one thing, that is extremely important and always we need to keep on emphasizing is that wastewater treatment and management, fecal sludge treatment and management is not a one size fits all. We can't just, go to a small town or a densely populated area or a sparsely populated area and try to construct a big scale centralized treatment plant. It does not work. For this, again, we need to take into consideration the geographies, the socio-cultural norms, and different aspects and finance-related aspects also. So recently, we had a discussion, like Raman and I were part of a panel that was invited by the Swachh Bharat Mission Gujarat, wherein we were invited to speak about grey water management approaches that WaterAid India is taking, and what has worked, what has not worked, and everything. Because while fecal sludge management is one part of it, grey water management is also another important part of it. Especially, while grey water may not contaminate rivers as do fecal waste, but the potential of grey water to be recycled and reused and to improve the groundwater levels is immense. So in that sense, how do we make sure that we also focus on different types of liquid waste management is something that we are also looking at. And we have in the past and are still quite severely emphasizing on the need for decentralized and especially when you're talking about grey water management. Why is it important that for rural and households in small and medium towns to have grey water systems that are household level, household grey water treatment systems? How it is very easy to purify this, the water that comes from your kitchens or the water that comes from your bathing and everything. How simple techniques that are not energy intensive, that do not need electricity, that does not need one to have a heavy understanding of technology or engineering background, but rather simple filtration mechanisms and purification mechanisms that can help and purify the grey water that is coming from home and improve the groundwater. That is something that we are quite, focusing on, and we are also supporting the, informing the Swachh Bharat Mission for the phase 2 regarding this as well. And also with regards to fecal sludge management, we have these WaterAid has piloted 3 different fecal sludge treatment systems in 3 different parts of the Uttar Pradesh and in Madhya Pradesh, if I'm not wrong, something that Raman could also give some insight on, using different technologies depending on the community's needs, depending on the type of waste that is producing, depending on what is the financial availability with the panchayats, what is the human resource availability with the panchayats, what do the what can be done with this fecal waste, and how is it providing employment opportunity to the local communities and everything. Taking into consideration all of these elements, whilst also making sure that no fecal waste goes into a river or a body, thereby contaminating water sources, or also ensuring that the element of human interface is respected, dignified, and the persons involved in the sanitation work are treated with dignity and respect just as any other workers, and are not looked down upon because of the fact that they work with human excreta or anything of that sort. As you have mentioned, decentralized approach is extremely important, but also again taking into consideration the community's requirements and everything. And when we are talking about climate resilience, again, it can't just be one-sided. We need to take into consideration the electricity that may go into it, or the human resources that go into it, and different aspects as well.
Thank you. Thanks, Amulya. I think one thing that this pandemic has taught us, and I speak even the experience of Parmat, which works with villagers in UP and MP Bundelkhand region. And so we were talking to him about how they are working on, how addressing this COVID second wave and what are the villagers saying. So he was saying that, whatever they did for that COVID management, that's another story, which I won't get into. But what he was saying is that now villagers are starting to think that how can we become independent Atmanirbhar units? So they were looking at how can they become water secure? How can they grow their own food? Because, when a pandemic comes and they're just left on their own and they have to rush back, what are the things they can manage in their own village? Looking at nutrition security, looking at food security, looking at livelihoods, so water augmentation, growing appropriate crops, looking at the sanitation needs, and then also looking at what is it that they're not able to get from their own villages. Say, for example, so at that point of time, they had identified tea, chai ki patti, and they had identified chini. And they said, ke chai ki jagah tum tulsi ka kadha pee lenge. But, so this thinking that I'm just trying to say that it's important because it's just getting to be so uncertain. I feel that it's important. I mean, why were people buying oxygen cylinders, all the medication, 6 months ration, even an oxygen generator or whatever, because things are becoming so uncertain. So I think the more decentralized we can get, and I know that WaterAid and you all both have just, again, reiterated the work that you're doing on this. I think that's really important and will help us go a long way in this, in this journey for water security at a time and life security at a time when we have this changing climate. Ritika and Arjun, are there any questions? I have a last one, then I'll pose at the end. Ritika?
Ritika, can you check?
You are not audible.
Ritika, am I not audible?
You're audible.
Okay. Why don't, ma'am, you proceed? I am on phone, so I cannot.
Okay, cool.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Please.
So, Raman and Amulya, I'll just start with a bit of I can't see anybody, with a personal experience. Okay, so after this Chamoli disaster, for 1 month later on, I was seeing pictures of the river still being all muddy. That was one part. I stay in Sarita Vihar, New Delhi. And for the longest time, my water supply was intermittently affected because there was too much silt and debris in the water that was feeding. I get water from the Ganga. Sarita Vihar gets from the Sonia water treatment plant. And because of this debris and all that was coming, they had to shut down the water treatment plant. And there were several ecologists earlier who had said that you should not be very careful by constructing hydropower projects or anything in the upper reaches of the Himalayas, because it's very steep and it's very uncertain. Himalayas are growing. They're kind of unstable as it is. So my question is that it's becoming now, I'm remembering a game of bowling also. You hit one pin and then all 9 go one after another if you're lucky. It's now becoming a scenario that any intervention you do is affecting, it's become very complex. So it's affecting many, many different things. So that disaster in Chamoli, whatever disaster it created, one, but its ripples are also felt among people sitting in Delhi and along the way and other places. So when we all know that water is integral to nature. We all know the linkage between forests and water. So when we do an intervention, when we do large-scale deforestation, ultimately it is going to have an impact on the water resource. It's going to have an impact on climate. And it is going to affect the drinking water and sanitation as well. I mean, Raman, you also know, Amulya, you also know, people have migrated because they don't have drinking water. I mean, how sad is that? Just drinking water they don't have. Forget about agriculture. So I wanted to ask you, is there any conversation amongst the WASH organizations maybe at a global level to look at, engage at this and say that, okay, we need to protect nature if we want to protect water and we want to protect and thereby protect access to drinking water and sanitation?
All right. So this is something a very important question, Indra. So one thing is that there is a clear realization that water sector organizations, specifically organizations working on drinking water. So you will also know that the understanding is that we are not supposed to look at the other aspects of water use. So we are only focusing on that segment of 3% or whatever of the total freshwater availability. We are only going to look at this part of it. But that kind of approach, it may be all right for planning the internal kind of activities, but for ensuring that the ground for doing that internal, planning and that environment is there, for ensuring the optimal environment for action, it's quite important to see things in the bigger picture. So for that, you really need the system thinking in place. So that is where sector strengthening becomes one of the important conditions if you want to really augment whether it is water supply, whether it is sanitation or hygiene, the systems, for that, the governance problems of that, and the multi-sectoral understanding of, things are quite critical. So that is where the water and climate change campaign and water and disaster, related linkages. So the agenda is, expanding. But the agenda is expanding. On the other hand, at the program delivery, you need to be very specific also. I mean, this dichotomy is an issue. This dichotomy, what sector organizations are going to really face this dichotomy. At one point, we need to talk in the larger canvas or larger landscape, so to speak. And within that, you have to make a portrait. So how to create that portrait within the landscape is a bigger kind of challenge that we are having. So within that, this water and climate change campaign that WaterAid has started, and engaging with broader country level collaborations, whether it is the BRICS or various other platforms that is talking about these issues. So earlier, our engagement used to be limited to SUSENA and SDG 6 only. But now we are, engaging ourselves into larger kind of picture, so that there is space for drinking water available within the larger kind of, picture. So that is how it is. And
this needs to be taken up internationally, not only for India.
Yeah, the transboundary water security also was the same kind of realization, wherein Ganga starts from probably Uttarakhand, but Ganga is having something to do with Bangladesh to Nepal with, so how we can look at the, delimiting the boundaries. I mean, I'm not talking about limiting, delimiting the boundaries, and then operate about the issues of marginalized populations living around and, alongside the river banks. How can we think about their life and their water access and water security from the same kind of empathetic understanding of a kind of broader life and life-related requirements. So these are coming into, but of course, at the program level, we are constrained with whatever resources.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. You don't have, yeah, but it's just important to raise the issues and, to raise and to sound the, kind of to raise the issue. I mean, at least if that's what this network is aiming to do, I think that's great. So Arjun and Ritika, if there are no questions, then we can close the session. Would you have a question, Raman and Amulya?
Yeah, I mean, I only wanted to say that, we are on the 4th of June. Tomorrow is the World Environment Day. So I think, and also we are amid the pandemic, the second World Environment Day after the pandemic has opened up. So, there are a lot of lessons that pandemic has given. There are a lot of lessons that the pandemic climate has given, and also the broader climate has given. So I think these discussions, not only should ignite our minds, but also should ignite our actions. I hope that it will give some energy towards that. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, no, that was the purpose, Raman, to start this this series. Arjun, is he there?
Yes, ma'am, I am here. Ritika, are you ready? Ritika will quickly propose a vote of. I also wanted to ask that, Raman sir, how do you now see the third wave coming, and what are the preparation, because 2 waves, all the frontline workers are tired.
So, yeah, I mean, that's a very different magnitude of question, but important, because the third wave is coming. One of the things is that yesterday I was giving an interview to a media house on the same topic. So one of the thing that came up was that how, we can, the human resource, level, there is a clear, what you call, so some tiredness or, some, actually, the exact word for that, none of the English words will match it. So it is really, people are feeling at some point, they are feeling that they are overworked. Actually they are overworked. And, we are not actually planning the human resources in a very optimal manner so that they are distributed into various tasks. And the rural areas are really going to struggle if there is a third wave. So whatever lessons we learned during the second wave, how can we, avoid all that, whether it is the oxygen issue, whether it is the drugs and supply issue, and the vaccine issue, we need to really look at how to, it is not, becoming the largest vaccine producer in the world is not going to answer the problems of India, because we ourselves will require 1/3 of the vaccine requirement of the world. So, this is something to be understood, and our public sector units, vaccine units, our, larger production capacities of vaccines, all that needs to be utilized for not only internal and domestic purposes, also for, supporting those most needy countries. I will not say vaccine nationalism here. We need to support others, but we need to also look at, our kind of requirements. We need to strengthen our public health system. We need to further regulate our private system. And we need to also, as the high courts and others are observing, we need to also see that the supplies are going through the right channels to the right people, rather than someone, mediating about it. So those kinds of things, if you are able to look at, and if you are able to provide good rest to, the frontliners, and, some mixing and matching of human resources and training them, those kinds of things are happening. If we are actually augmenting the testing, all these are quite critical. And then social security measures. That is the critical thing of pandemic management rather than medicine and health. I think, so far we have to really manage. People are not hungry. We have to really see that people have some kind of energy to stand up and do things. So many people have lost their livelihood. So one of the, or, half of the major, effort of pandemic management, I should go into livelihood and livelihood support to people. This is how I summarize. There's a lot to it, Arjun. Thank you.
I think adding on to that, another quick thing is also that, hand hygiene is something, the most basic thing, but yet the most effective thing, to just prevent
the COVID protective behavior.
Yeah, so the COVID protective behavior and ensuring hand hygiene for all, and making sure that, that the most vulnerable and marginalized community, especially now during the monsoon season with the occurrence of floods and cyclones and everything. How do we ensure that everybody is provided with safe and clean drinking water and water for basic, to follow basic hand hygiene and everything is also something that we shouldn't forget about, because, while it has been over a year since the pandemic has begun and everything, and, it's become that, hand hygiene is something that has fallen back a little. So one thing that we need to consciously remember and, make sure to follow these COVID protective behavior.
Right. We will try to have more deliberation on this topic, WASH, as we progress. So thank you, everyone. Ritika, why don't you go ahead? Ritika?
They're not able to hear you. No, your mic is not good.
Ritika, can you hear me?
She can hear you.
Yes, Ritika, why don't you go ahead and propose the vote?
She's saying there's some problem with her mic.
Oh, not audible. Okay, so let me propose the vote. Thanks, no problem. So thank you, everyone. And on behalf of Center for Environment, Climate Change and Sustainable Development at IMPRI and Tarun Bharat Sangh, India Water Portal and Paramahansa Samaj Sevi Sansthan, we thank all of you for joining in our special series, Water and Climate. And as Rajan Singh sir has suggested, Tarun Bharat Sangh's work also, and Indra ma'am, that water is climate, climate is water. So we are trying to highlight the issue and learn from our top experts. So today's deliberation on climate change mitigation, an agenda for WASH sector organization, given by V.R. Raman sir and Amulya ma'am. Thank you very much, and a very excellent talk and lecture. And we hope to learn more and discuss more of these issues. We will also bring out papers and all, so that others can also learn. And I would also like to thank the moderator for series, Dr. Indra Khurana ma'am, for leading this deliberation. Thank you, everyone, and have a nice evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Raman and Amulya, and thank you, IMPRI team. Thank you, Arjun.
Stay safe and take care.
Thank you,
yeah, you too.
Have a nice day.
Thank you so much, everyone.